Welcome everyone back to the main stage session. Hopefully there was some productive and delightful conversation. I think, all too often we find a lot of these events become very much, people talking, you listening. We want to make sure there's as much interaction as possible. I think within that same kind of, idea and perspective as well, when we're looking at the theme for the day, there's very much this balance of evolution and revolution. And I think, over the years, we've certainly evolved everything that we've been doing. I want to take one moment to talk a little bit about adaptation, and in particular, really from a personal perspective within Landmark. I've been with the company, as I mentioned, for 12 years. When the organization was started originally back in the 90s, it was a set of angel investors. And the thought process from an angel investing perspective was to pool expertise together beyond just money, and to be able to apply that expertise to drive growth, to drive success. And within that concept, actually, we had a tremendous amount of success. And it worked well from 95 until about 2001. In 2001, the bubble burst, and like many others, our capital was outlaid, and so there was a natural kind of what now moment. And so we took a look around and said, all of the work we've been doing around mentor capital, all of the things that we've been able to provide, whether that's strategic productization, that's marketing, it's business development, it's the hiring, firing, building teams, the rewriting a business plan, all of those things are things we can provide a company regardless of whether we invest or not. And so effectively, we reinvented ourselves and actually put ourselves in a position where we took the kind of smart from smart money and turned it into a service. And so today we have an advisory group focused on smart as a service. But that was a natural kind of evolution that we had to go through in order to adapt, realizing that we didn't have the capital to invest for those years. The next iteration, if you fast forward to 2008, 2009, yet again another crisis, yet again another opportunity. We saw a very underserved market for fundraising and M&A, with a lot of investment banks closing their doors, and so we opened ours. So we have a wholly owned broker-dealer to do buy-side and sell-side M&A, as well as private placement fundraising. So in the banking side of what we do, yet again, we found a new iteration. I think that last piece of what we do from a capital perspective, while dormant today, will also transform and be something else tomorrow. And so we've had to reinvent ourselves over the years. And really, we still keep one consistent theme, which is this idea of driving growth and success. We always like to put ourselves in the position of being king makers. We don't want to be king ourselves. We also put ourselves in the position to be deal makers. And I think that's one of the reasons that we host events like that. This is one of the reasons that we're here today, is to help facilitate and drive. Certainly there's wonderful content. We want to make sure everyone leaves with ideas in their head, but also with business cards in their pocket. So that's kind of the foundation. That's why I think it's important to drive that adaptation, and hopefully that's useful and interesting. I think, within that same kind of concept, what I've heard recently, when you look around and you think about companies that you never thought would go out of business, when you think of companies that have gone out of business, but you didn't know why, or they got acquired by somebody else, I think there's a statistic, and I'll have to look up the exacts later, but something like basically 1 out of every 10 companies that was in the Fortune 500 about 15, 20 years ago has more or less gone. That's an earth-shattering statistic. If you look around, for every 10 of you, 1 of them will be gone. And that company could be as big as a GE, who has to reinvent itself and has gone through the process, and we heard that from Steve and from the GE Capital folks. I think that could be what's happening in the automotive industry, and it could be what's happening even within your company today. And I think one of the reasons that's such a challenge is just the nature of how we drive innovation. And innovation is one of those things, well, I like to use a Mark Twain quote to describe it. Mark Twain says, "The definition of a classic is a book that everyone wants to have read, but nobody wants to read." I think the same concept applies to innovation. We all want to be innovative, but nobody wants to innovate. And so the constraints within an enterprise especially are, how do you actually facilitate that level of innovation? Also, how do you kind of create the right structure, the right culture, the right budget? And so that's actually the topic that we'll be talking about next, so I'd like to welcome our moderator up. I've known Isaac for a very long time, and Isaac actually has done a great job of innovating, and so he'll be able to share. But we also have our panelists, Casey and Scott, so let's give them a round of applause.